Hey, what's good, everybody? It's another episode of Film Streak. And look, I'm here with some new films. These are films that, I don't really have a setup for necessarily. I can't really even remember how I got onto this run of films, but I can tell you that it started a little while back when I saw The Wave again. I just sat down and rewatched it for a while. And The Wave, I mean, there's different films called The Wave. I'm talking about the Norwegian film that is about what is it? It's like I guess it's not a tsunami. It's like a tidal wave, right? That hits this part of Norway. And there's a family at the center of it. And they have to try to escape and they have to try to find safety. It's basically like a natural disaster film, but set in a very different part of the world. I feel like a part of the world we don't really see very much, right? So it was interesting to kind of revisit that. I hadn't seen that in quite a while. And I thought, well, let me see, is there some other stuff in this? And, and I did actually see there was a sequel to that called The Quake. And I remember watching that a long time ago. I haven't seen it in a while, but I thought, the same filmmakers, they came back and they did a sequel, same characters in another natural disaster situation. But I just thought, well, maybe there's some other stuff like this, maybe from the same filmmakers, maybe from this same genre, let's say. And turns out there is with Norwegian or Nordic filmmakers and kind of taking this type of story and adapting it and making it their own, really. And so I hit some other films here. They were kind of surprising. A couple of them, I'll just get into them. It's funny, though, they all seem to start in the same way, right? They're all essentially kind of based around life in that part of the world and how life has changed over the last few decades. And by that, I just mean whether it's the development of oil, the development of the culture there. There are just some things that once I saw these films, it kind of highlighted to me like why this is a very specific lane, right? So let me just get into a few of these. One that I saw was called The Tunnel, and that's from 2019. And, I feel like this is probably the closest like knockoff of The Wave and The Quake. It's stepping on the same corner, right? It starts and it kind of rides this mundane family sort of soap opera. It feels kind of simplistic in a way. I got to say, like, even when we get down to like the disaster that happens, which is this tunnel, in this part of the world, there's a lot of tunnels and going through mountains, and there's a lot of traffic, a lot of vehicles that use roads that go through tunnels. And this film explores like what happens when one of those tunnels like floods and people get trapped in it, right? And there's a real kind of a scientific, like logical way to depict that kind of a disaster, I guess. And I feel like we've probably seen it in some other kinds of films. But here it really focuses on the people. And I think, unfortunately, that doesn't really work in its favor because there's so much here that is just dialogue. And honestly, it's like dialogue that doesn't really seem necessary. It just sounds like a lot of like busy work, like people saying a lot of things, but not really pushing the story forward or even motivating why these characters are doing what they're doing. It's just a lot of people saying stuff. And it reminds me of, there's a term called shoe leather in, I guess it's in like the screenwriting terminology. And it's essentially that device that you might use when you're writing something or telling a story where you're kind of, it is kind of just busy work. Like you're just saying a lot of things, thinking that it's adding to the momentum or the development of the plot, but it's really not. It's just kind of taking up space. And that's where I felt like it just really stood out in this film. I didn't really feel like I'm seeing and feeling the actual tension or the drama of this disaster unfolding and these people being trapped in this situation. I just felt like it was a lot of people talking about other things and things just to the left or just to the right of what's happening. That and I feel like some of the editing, some of the filmmaking techniques here, it felt like it was trying to create suspense and create tension when it maybe really isn't there. And, you know, there's moments like this, there's films like this where I see stuff, and because I've watched so many films, I feel like I can see the tricks. I see the shortcuts. I see the ways to kind of amplify or enhance or create a feeling or tension or energy. And in this film, it just stands out. Like I just see the tricks too clearly. And I can just sense like there's not really anything happening that suspenseful here. It's just, I don't know. I got into like a real deconstructive mindset watching the film, which is not a place you want to be. You want to be locked in. You want to be with the characters and with what's happening. And instead, I find myself just kind of stepping back and just kind of picking it all apart. And then once you do that, I mean, you lose any kind of attachment or tension with what's happening. And you see the artificiality of it, right? It's a strange phenomenon. I've had it with other films too. This one is probably the one that, out of these at least, it stuck out the most of like, oh, I don't believe any of this now. And yeah, I don't know if that's me. Maybe that's just me. I don't know if that's necessarily the film. Some people probably like this film and really think it's really enjoyable or really exciting. I just found myself in a weird space with it, you know? The other film that I saw that kind of was on the heels of this is called The Burning Sea, and that's from 2021. And this is maybe more directly related to the wave and the quake. This is from one of the co-writers of those films. And in a similar way, it's also about a natural disaster, people trapped in a situation, and there's no real clear way that they're going to find safety and you know, how are they going to resolve this, right? Because it's so big. It's such a big problem. This, on the other hand, though, aside from those other films, which are, I guess, based more on just actual natural disasters, this is kind of combining that with a man-made disaster. This takes place on an oil rig, and there's an accident, and the tension comes from there's this risk that this could turn into a massive oil spill, right? And if you're familiar with Norway, you're familiar with the oil and gas industry, like that industry is like massive out there. And so this being not just about people being in danger and the environment kind of, you know, having its way with us, but it's also about like, what could this mean for that part of the world? This is a massive, massive problem. And so here in this film, we kind of see it play out, right? We see the North Sea itself, because of this incident, it's basically covered in oil. Like there is an oil spill that happens. And the strange thing, and I can't say how far-fetched it is really. I don't know like the actual real science, even though the film really tries to play it close to reality, I feel like. The solution that the characters come up with is we don't really know how to resolve all of this oil now just spread across the ocean. So we're just going to set the oil on fire and burn it off. And I guess the idea is like this is the last resort. And so that's where you get this, you know, the burning sea, right? They basically set the whole thing on fire. And I only laugh because it sounds ridiculous. The way it plays out in the film, though, it's actually kind of, it's got some real suspense to it. And you're really on the edge of like, could this work? Is this possible? And I feel like the film kind of ventures into, I don't know, some form of pseudo science fiction in a way, because it just feels like that really doesn't sound plausible or feasible, right? But you think about different natural disasters that have happened over the years, whether it's like the Exxon Valdez or, you know, this part of the world, the Deepwater Horizon, that whole thing. These problems are man-made, and most times they're preventable or avoidable. And it's because of some accident or because of some negligence. And here, I mean, I don't feel like it's really said that we're going to do this to kind of cover our ass. It's like we're doing this to save this part of the world. I think that's the general MO here with the characters. But it does kind of feel like that whole thing of, hey, you know, we had a car accident, so we're just going to set the car on fire. Like, that's really not how you want to resolve something like this. But that's where this film goes. That's the thing it's trying to play out, I guess. And I got to say, you know, for that kind of story, I mean, the filmmaking at least is on par. Like, it feels like the stunts, the action of it, the visual effects, it feels pretty convincing. And that's where I feel like this kind of story, above whatever directions it goes in, if it just looks cheap or it looks not put together well, then that's where it can fall down, right? So it's got that going for it. It at least feels legit. A couple other films I saw here. One that is kind of related to that in a way. It's called Pioneer. And this is a little further back. This is from 2013, but it's about in the 1980s, there became this kind of arms race. And so here we have a part of that, right? Like a part of that race is we got to send divers down. We got to be able to construct a pipeline. We got to be able to handle these kinds of depths, these kinds of temperatures. You know, it's a different environment than working in other parts of the world. So that's where this film comes in, and we see these groups, this group of divers that are sent to the bottom with, you know, the idea of one, kind of testing the limits, but also testing some technology and the tools and everything to get a pipeline started, to build a pipeline at the bottom of the ocean. And it starts out in a way where I really thought, oh, this is going to be another kind of natural disaster thing where there's an accident and then somebody is trapped and they've got to find their way kind of back to safety, back to the surface. And it doesn't really go that way. I mean, there is a part of it that is that, but it's also about these two brothers. You know, two of these divers are brothers, and one of them, I guess, spoiler, one of them is killed towards the beginning of the film. And you think, oh, wow, that escalated quickly. But then it becomes the role of the other brother to figure out, like, wait, how did this happen? They're saying it's my fault. And it's my brother, and I can't let that go. And so he starts to try and investigate and try and understand, like talking to the different, you know, people on the team, the different doctors and scientists, like, how did this go wrong? I didn't do anything wrong. So how can you say this was an accident and it was my fault that I killed my brother? And so, like, at some point, half of this film becomes like a conspiracy thriller. You know, there's a part of it that is about the accident and the disaster, the tragedy of it. But then it is about this character also, like, uncovering this conspiracy to essentially cheat their way to be first. Whether it's to get divers on the bottom, whether it's to build the pipeline, it's just to be first in this race to start pulling oil out from the North Sea. It was actually more intriguing when it did that versus just being, you know, someone stuck at the bottom of the ocean. So, I mean, I actually enjoyed this one a lot. I mean, it had a different sort of tension than the others because you're not so worried about these characters like succumbing to the elements or just kind of being tossed around by Mother Nature. It is a little more about the ability to trust and believe the people around you and whether they're telling the truth, whether they're trying to hurt you or come after you. And all of that, you know, that's the other thing this film does, I think. It pulls a few tricks when it comes to depicting the nature of pressure. And I say that in a couple of different ways. You know, one being these divers, they have to go through this pressurization process, you know, to get down deep. They have to test themselves. They have to do this compression and decompression as they're going down to the depths and then coming back up to the surface. But there's also this element of this character kind of being surrounded and not knowing who to turn to and not knowing who to trust. It similarly plays with that sort of pressure of the mistrust that just floats around you when you're in that headspace, you know? So I thought it did it pretty effectively. I felt like I was there with the character and there with like seeing him succeed and seeing him find the truth. The last film that I saw here, Breaking Surface from 2020. This is what I thought Pioneer was going to be, essentially. And it's funny enough, I mean, it is about two sisters who, you know, the film opens with them going through this kind of childhood swimming accident and the trauma that it kind of leaves with them. And so I feel like, one, it could be like a good foreshadowing device, right? To show like this is how these characters started. Then we cut to them as adults and they're living different lives and they're coming back together. They're coming home and they're going to this spot where they're going to go diving. And one of the sisters is a diver. She's like a professional diver. You see her at one point, like this is what she does. The other sister who is going through some like family issues, marital issues or whatever. So she's kind of in a bad way. And this is where I feel like the film, it starts to get shaky because I just think there's a little too much telegraphing going on that something bad is going to happen. You know what I mean? I mean, it's one thing to foreshadow some things, like just set something up, like, hey, don't forget this place, or don't forget that gun, right? But there's just a little too much. It's a little too heavy-handed of setting this up of like, okay, we know something bad's going to happen. I guess if you read the description or the summary or synopsis or whatever, you're going to understand that. But if you just come into this a little cold, I think it's best to just play this straight and just be like, hey, there's two sisters. They're regrouping. They've been away for a while, and maybe they're going to find some sort of connection. They're going to reconnect and get some things straightened out or whatever it is. But here we get to this point where they go to this spot to go diving, and this is where it starts to feel like, okay, we're in, I don't know if there's a specific name for it, but there is that genre of films, that film Fall, or what was the one, The Shallows. It's a character trapped in a situation that's kind of impossible to get out of, and they've got to figure it out. They got to find a way. There was that one Frozen with the couple on the ski lift. Remember that? What else? There's a couple more that are very specifically that kind of film. And there's even one like this that I haven't seen yet. 47 meters down? I think that's the one. So it's about, two people that are kind of stuck underwater and have to find safety. This is kind of that. One of the sisters gets trapped underwater, and the other sister has to basically figure out a way to get her, one, to get her air, but then two, to get her out, right? To get her back to the surface. And I just feel like that's where the film really starts to come apart. I mean, whether it was shaky to begin with, the sister who is the one that has to go get help or figure this out, she's kind of the one that is the less put together of the two and makes some really, really questionable decisions, I mean, I understand like there's like a rock slide, you get trapped underwater, there's panic, you don't know what to do, and you can make a bad call. But there's so many things here that I feel like these don't make any sense why this character would do this. And so, the sister that goes up to the surface, she goes back to the car. She can't figure out how to get in the trunk because there's a jack in the trunk, but there's not a jack in the trunk. But the other sister told her there was a jack in the trunk. There's like a few too many things that you think you would know. Because the sister who is the diver is totally prepared for this situation, or so it seems, and yet picks a bad spot because there's a rock slide. All their equipment gets buried. Doesn't know that the car that they're in doesn't have a jack in the trunk. And the sister who goes for it can't figure out how to open the trunk because she doesn't have keys to the trunk because they're buried under the rocks. There's little things like that. It's like, wait, we should have maybe thought this through a little better, right? If we're going underwater, putting ourselves in a potentially dangerous situation. I can't say there's no tension in it. It doesn't totally deflate the film. I want these characters to survive. I want them to succeed, but I question why they're doing what they're doing. It's a weird thing to feel watching a film like that. And, the thing I can say is that it at least plays out most of this in a pretty realistic sense. Like, it doesn't get into anything fantastical, or it doesn't get into any kind of quasi science fiction. Like, it plays it pretty real. And it's just it just reinforces my opinion that we just don't belong in the water, Because I guess that is the one thing it does convey, is that sense of like, there really is no way out of this. I mean, this is a total foreign environment that people just aren't meant to be in. And as soon as one thing goes wrong, that's your ass, And you know what? I guess that's actually the case with all of these films. All of these films have to do with water. So for me, Pioneer was probably the standout of the selection here. Doing some interesting things to convey that sort of danger and the tension of the situation. Not only below the surface, but above the surface when it comes to just someone not knowing what they can trust. Like, can they even believe what they're hearing and what they're seeing? Is it even a form of, there is like a pressure sickness you can get. And so I thought that one really worked on a few different levels. So otherwise, hey, look, that's it for this episode. I'm going to be back with a pretty big episode next time. We're doing something big because it's going to be episode 100. So until then, you can go to filmstreak.com. You can find other episodes. You can subscribe. You can sign up to get these by email. Go there and get the link to all these films on IMDb so you can add them to your list. You can see where they're available to watch. Rate them there if you want. I use it as just my thing to kind of keep track of all these. Otherwise, hey, go have some fun. It's springtime, and go watch something new.